Now we are going to look at another strategy. Remember, we are still dividing fractions by whole number, and we are still looking at our fraction that we had before, and we are still looking at our whole number, which is 2. And here's the next strategy. You can turn the whole number into a fraction. So your whole number is 2, right? And you might be wondering, how do I turn this into a fraction? What you can do is set your denominator as 1. And I'm going to prove it to you why this is okay. You're going to take it and you're going to write it as a long division because you're asking yourself, hmm, how do I know that this is true? Let's prove it. Because we always want to make sure that we prove our work. And before I go into that, there are about 2 ways that you can double check. And you can write it as a long division. And the other way is you can rewrite this by putting a magnifying glass over it and ask yourself, how else can I write 2 over 1? You can see that you can take a whole from this. If you were to take a whole, what would your numerator be and what would your denominator be? Hint, hint, look at your denominator to help you. Your denominator in this one is telling you how to write your denominator. If my denominator is 1 and I'm trying to find a whole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my numerator as 1 as well. Because any number or any fraction that has a numerator and a denominator that is the same number, same value, same digits is going to equal to 1. We have 1, 1. If you add another 1 over it, what does that equal to? 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, and your denominator stays the same. There you have it. 2 over 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1. Now, if you were to write this as a division problem, this is how it would look. You can say 2 divided by, notice how I write my division sign. I wrote it as the long division sign, 2 divided by 1. And you can ask yourself, how many times can 1 go into 2? Again, how many times can 1 go into 2? We can write our facts. You have 1 times 1 is equal to 1, and 1 times 2 is equal to 2. So how many times can 1 go into 2? It can go 2 times. And now you can multiply 2 times 1 is equal to 2, subtract that, and you're left with 0. So you see, you have the 2 in your answer. It's okay if you have a whole number and you turn it into a fraction by putting your denominator as 1. That is totally fine because as you can see, we just prove it by dividing. You get the same thing. Now let's go on. You have 2/3 divided by 2 over 1. And now you're going to find equivalent fractions because you have 2 different denominators. You have 2/3 divided by 2 over 1. Notice that your denominators are different. And we know what to do when we do not have the same denominators. Like I said before, if you are adding, you're subtracting, you are dividing, and your denominators are different, we already know what to do. Don't get confused because now we're dividing and our denominators are different. Guess what? We can use the same strategy that we've been using for addition and for subtraction. We can use that same strategy. Don't get confused. And we know that our LCD is equal to 3. So Let's see. 2/3 is how many thirds? It's the same thing as 2/3. And 2/1 is how many thirds? 2/1 is equal to 6/3. Now, let's see. What do you remember about how to solve this problem when your denominators are the same? If you say we ignore the denominators, you are correct. Yeah. So I want to explain to you why we would ignore our denominators. You have 2/3 divided by 6/3. Your denominators are 3, right? What you're actually doing is this. You're doing 2 divided by 6 over 3 divided by 3. That's what you're doing. And I said to ignore the denominators because when you do 3 divided by 3, if you were to write it as a fraction, this is what it looks like, 3/3. And we know that 3/3 is the same thing as 1. So you're going to divide this and you're going to have 1 in your denominator. And we know that any number that has 1 in its denominator is equal to the numerator because it's the same thing. Or because when we divide it, we see that our numerator is the same answer that we get. So it's okay to put 1 as your denominator. And if you see in the reverse, you know that your answer is what the numerator is. Now let's go on. Remember, we said we are going to ignore the denominators. So you're going to ignore 3 in 2/3, and you're going to ignore 3 in 6/3. Then you are going to focus on your numerators, which are 2 divided by 6. And you are going to rewrite them as your fraction, not your denominator. You're rewriting your numerators as a fraction. You have 2 in your numerator, and then you have 6 in your denominator because you read it from left to right. Let's look at it. You had, what was the fraction? You had 2/3, then you're dividing 6/3. Remember, we said you ignore the denominator, and now you have your 2 divided by 6. Read it from left to right. You have numerator divided by denominator. That's basically what it is. You can also break down your 2/3 by dividing your numerator by 2 and dividing your denominator by 2. We know that 2 divided by 2 is equal to 1, and 6 divided by 2 is equal to 3. That is going to be it for this lesson on a fraction divided by a whole number. If you are confused or if you need to watch this over again, rewind it, go back, take your time, take notes, write it over, give yourself more problems, and try to solve it on your own by following the strategies that I use. You can either draw your bar model or you can find your LCD by changing your whole number into a fraction. And you'll see that once you do that, you are always going to get 2 different denominators. You can always go back, watch it, and make sure that you understand what you're doing when you're dividing fraction by a whole number. See you in the next lesson.